Sarah Mitchell had served her country for 8 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to ever complete the grueling training program. She had jumped from helicopters into enemy territory, survived impossible missions in the Middle East, and earned the respect of the toughest warriors in the world. But on that rainy Tuesday afternoon in a small town in Colorado, none of that seemed to matter. She had just gotten back from deployment 3 months ago and was trying to adjust to civilian life. It wasn't easy. The transition from the structured world of military operations to the chaos of everyday life felt like jumping into cold water. She took a job as a security consultant for a local company, hoping it would give her some purpose while she figured out what came next. That day, Sarah stopped at a gas station on the edge of town. She was wearing simple clothes, jeans, and a plain jacket, nothing that screamed former military. Her truck needed gas, and she needed coffee. The rain was coming down hard, turning the parking lot into a mess of puddles and mud. As she walked toward the convenience store entrance, she noticed a group of 5 men standing near the side of the building. They were wearing mismatched military surplus gear, the kind you could buy at any army store. Their boots were too clean, their postures too relaxed. Sarah had been around real soldiers long enough to spot wannabes from a mile away. One of them, a tall guy with a scraggly beard and a cocky smirk, noticed her. He nudged his friend and said something she couldn't quite hear. They all turned to look at her. Sarah kept walking, not interested in whatever game they were playing. But the tall one stepped into her path. His name tag, probably fake, said Morrison. He crossed his arms and looked down at her with exaggerated authority. "Hold up there, sweetheart," Morrison said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know this is a restricted area, right?" Sarah stopped and looked at him calmly. There were no signs, no barriers, nothing indicating any restriction. This was a public gas station. She could see what this was. These guys were playing soldier, and they thought they could push around a random woman. "Restricted?" Sarah said evenly. "This is a gas station." Morrison's friends laughed. Another one, shorter and stockier, stepped forward. "We're conducting security operations in this area. Civilians need to follow our instructions." Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the same one she got before a mission went sideways. Her instincts were screaming at her. These men weren't security. They weren't military. They were just bullies in costumes. "I'm just here to get coffee," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll be on my way." She tried to step around Morrison, but he moved to block her again. His smirk widened. "Not so fast. We need to verify your identity. You could be a threat." The situation was escalating unnecessarily. Sarah had dealt with real threats, with armed insurgents and life-or-death situations. This was theater, but it was also dangerous in its own way. Men like this, with fake authority and real aggression, could turn violent quickly. "I'm not showing you anything," Sarah said firmly. "You're not law enforcement. You're not military. Move aside." Morrison's expression darkened. His friends moved closer, forming a semicircle around her. The rain poured down harder, soaking through everyone's clothes. "You got a real attitude problem, lady," Morrison said. "Maybe you need to learn some respect." Sarah remained calm on the outside, but inside, she was calculating. 5 against 1, all bigger than her. No visible weapons, but that could change. The nearest exit was behind her. The store clerk was visible through the window, but he was looking down at his phone, oblivious. "Final warning," Morrison said. "Show us your ID and apologize for your disrespect, or we'll have to detain you." Sarah almost laughed. Detain her? These idiots really thought they had authority. But she knew better than to underestimate stupid men in groups. They fed off each other's energy, and things could get ugly fast. "I'm not doing either of those things," Sarah said. "Now get out of my way." Morrison glanced at his friends, as if looking for approval. Then he reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was meant to intimidate, to control. That was his first mistake. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. She could have broken his grip in a dozen different ways, could have put him on the ground in seconds. But she held back. She didn't want to escalate to violence if she could avoid it. Instead, she yanked her arm free and stepped back. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice dropping to a tone that had once commanded soldiers in combat zones. But Morrison wasn't smart enough to recognize danger when it was staring him in the face. He lunged forward again, this time with both hands, trying to grab her shoulders. Sarah sidestepped smoothly, and Morrison stumbled forward into the mud. His friends erupted in laughter, but it quickly turned to anger. Morrison pushed himself up, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You think you're tough?" he snarled. "We'll see about that." Before Sarah could react, two of his friends grabbed her from behind. They were strong, but clumsy. Sarah could have fought them off, but there were 5 of them, and she was trying to avoid creating a scene that might bring legal trouble down on her head. They dragged her backward through the parking lot. Her boots slipped in the mud, and she struggled to keep her balance. Morrison walked alongside them, his smirk back in place. "Seems like you need a lesson in humility," he said. "Lucky for you, we're good teachers." They pulled her to the edge of the parking lot, where the rain had created a massive mud puddle, almost a small pond. It was deep enough that Sarah could see her reflection in the murky water. "Go clean up," Morrison said, and then he nodded to his friends. They shoved her hard, and Sarah went sprawling forward into the mud. She hit face first, the cold, filthy water shocking her system. She tasted dirt and oil, felt the muck seeping into her clothes. Behind her, the 5 men roared with laughter. Sarah pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, mud dripping from her hair and face. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, controlled rage that she hadn't felt since her last combat deployment. The men were still laughing, high-fiving each other, recording the whole thing on their phones. They thought this was the end of it. They thought they'd put some random woman in her place and would walk away with a funny story. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Sarah slowly stood up, mud sliding off her jacket. She turned to face them, her eyes blazing with an intensity that finally made Morrison's smile falter. "You just made the biggest mistake of your lives," Sarah said quietly. Morrison tried to recover his bravado. "What are you going to do about it? You going to cry? Run home to your boyfriend?" Sarah didn't respond. She just stared at them, memorizing every face, every detail. The rain continued to pour down, washing some of the mud from her clothes, but not her resolve. She walked past them without another word, got into her truck, and drove away. In her rearview mirror, she could see them still laughing, still celebrating their little victory. But Sarah wasn't running away. She was planning. Because these men had just crossed a line with someone who had survived impossible odds, who had been trained by the best warriors in the world, and who had never, ever backed down from a challenge. They wanted to play soldier. Sarah was about to show them what a real soldier looked like. The war had just begun, and they didn't even know it yet. Sarah drove straight home, her hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The mud on her clothes was starting to dry and crack, making her skin itch, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already working through the problem like she would any tactical situation. First rule of engagement: know your enemy. She pulled into the driveway of her small rental house on the outskirts of town and headed straight for her laptop. She didn't bother changing clothes. There would be time for that later. Right now, she needed information. Sarah had learned during her time as a SEAL that the best operations started with intelligence gathering. You never went into a situation blind. Those men at the gas station had made themselves visible, loud, and stupid. That meant they would be easy to find. She started with the gas station itself. A quick search showed it was called Henderson's Stop and Go, a locally owned place that had been there for 20 years. She pulled up the station's location on a map and began searching social media for any mentions of it. Within 10 minutes, she found what she was looking for. A Facebook page called Colorado Civilian Defense Force had posted a photo just 2 hours ago. It showed Morrison and his 4 friends standing in front of the same gas station, all wearing their fake military gear and posing like they were some kind of elite unit. The caption read, "CCDF conducting security operations in Henderson County, keeping our community safe from threats. Semper Fi." Sarah felt a flash of anger at the Semper Fi part. That was the Marine Corps motto, and these clowns had no right to use it. But anger wouldn't help her now. She needed to stay cold and analytical. She clicked through the page. The Colorado Civilian Defense Force appeared to be some kind of militia group, though they tried to present themselves as a legitimate security organization. Their posts were a mix of conspiracy theories, tough guy posturing, and photos of them training in the woods. Sarah recognized all 5 men from the gas station in various photos. She started taking notes. Morrison appeared to be the leader, or at least the most vocal member. His real name was Derek Morrison, and, according to his personal Facebook page, which he'd linked to the group, he worked at an auto parts store and had never served in the military. The other 4 men were just as easy to identify. Jake Hendricks, the stocky one who had helped grab her, claimed to be a tactical consultant, but actually worked as a warehouse supervisor. Ryan Foster, tall and thin with a nervous energy in all the photos, was a security guard at a local mall. The other 2, brothers named Connor and Brett Walsh, ran a small construction company together. None of them had military experience. None of them had any real training. They were playing dress-up and terrorizing people to feel important. Sarah dug deeper. She found videos of them patrolling different areas of town, harassing people they deemed suspicious, which seemed to mean anyone who didn't immediately bow to their fake authority. There were posts from local residents complaining about them, but nothing seemed to have been done. She found one video that made her blood boil. It showed Morrison confronting a teenager at a park, demanding to search his backpack. The kid was terrified, clearly not understanding what was happening. Morrison was enjoying it, playing the part of the tough cop. Sarah took a screenshot of every post, every photo, every video. She was building a file, documenting their pattern of behavior. This wasn't just about what they'd done to her. These men were a menace to the entire community. Next, she searched for any official connection they might have. Were they registered as a legitimate security company? Did they have any actual authority? The answer was no. The Colorado Civilian Defense Force was nothing more than a Facebook page and a group of men with too much free time and too little sense. They had no legal standing, no authority, and no right to do any of the things they were doing. But that raised a question. Why hadn't anyone stopped them? Sarah made a call to an old friend from her Navy days, Marcus Chun, who had become a police detective in Denver after his service. He picked up on the second ring. "Sarah Mitchell," Marcus said warmly. "It's been too long. How's civilian life treating you?" "It's been interesting," Sarah said. "Listen, Marcus, I need your advice on something." She explained the situation, keeping her emotions in check and laying out the facts like a mission brief. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she'd always appreciated about him. When she finished, Marcus let out a low whistle. "These idiots are going to get themselves arrested or shot by someone who doesn't realize they're playing pretend. You got all their information." "Everything," Sarah confirmed. "Names, faces, their group's social media, patterns of behavior." "Good. Here's the thing, Sarah. What they did to you is assault. Clear cut. You could press charges right now, and they'd be in custody by tonight. What about the rest of it? The harassment, the impersonation. Impersonating a police officer is a crime. Impersonating military is trickier unless they're trying to gain benefits or something. But the harassment, the assault, that's all actionable. The problem is, small-town cops sometimes don't want to deal with this kind of thing. It gets messy, especially if these guys have friends in local government." Sarah had suspected as much. "So what do you recommend?" "Document everything, which you're already doing. File a police report about the assault. Make it official. Then, make some noise. These guys are active on social media, which means they care about their image. They think they're heroes. Show everyone what they really are." "Without breaking any laws myself," Sarah said. "Without breaking any laws," Marcus agreed. "You're smarter than they are, better trained, and you actually know how to conduct yourself. Use that advantage. Oh, and Sarah, be careful. Men like this, when they're cornered, they can get dangerous." "I've dealt with dangerous before," Sarah said quietly. "I know you have. But this isn't Afghanistan. You can't just neutralize a threat and move on. Everything you do has to be by the book." After she hung up with Marcus, Sarah finally took a shower and changed into clean clothes. The hot water felt good on her bruised muscles, and it gave her time to think. She wasn't going to just file a report and hope the system worked. The system had let these men terrorize people for months, maybe longer. No, she needed to be more strategic. By evening, Sarah had a plan. It was multi-layered, designed to dismantle the Colorado Civilian Defense Force piece by piece while staying completely within the law. Step 1 was to file the police report, as Marcus had suggested. She drove to the local police station and asked to speak with an officer. The desk sergeant, a tired-looking man in his 50s, barely looked up when she explained why she was there. "You want to file a report about what now?" he asked. "Assault," Sarah said clearly. "5 men assaulted me at Henderson's gas station this afternoon. Threw me into a mud puddle. I have witnesses, and they recorded it on their phones." That got his attention. He looked up, really seeing her for the first time. "Did you get their names?" "All 5, Sarah said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk, along with their social media profiles and the name of their group. The sergeant's expression changed when he saw the name Colorado Civilian Defense Force. "Oh, those idiots. Yeah, we've had complaints about them before." "And nothing was done?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice level. "Look, lady, they're annoying, but they're not really hurting anyone. They walk around, act tough, then go home. We've got actual crimes to deal with." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "They assaulted me. That's an actual crime. Are you going to take my report or not?" Something in her tone must have convinced him she wasn't going to just go away. He sighed and pulled out a form. "Fine. Let's get your statement." Sarah spent the next hour giving her detailed account of what had happened. She was precise, factual, and left no room for ambiguity. This was assault, plain and simple, and she wanted it on record. When she finished, the sergeant said he'd look into it, but his tone suggested he wasn't going to make it a priority. Sarah thanked him politely and left. She hadn't expected much from the local police, but now it was documented. That was important. Step 2 began that night. Sarah created a new social media account under her real name and with a profile photo that showed her in her Navy SEAL uniform. She wanted people to know exactly who she was and what her credentials were. Then, she wrote a post. It was calm, factual, and devastating. "Today, I was assaulted by 5 members of a group calling itself the Colorado Civilian Defense Force. These men, who have no military training, no legal authority, and no right to harass citizens, physically grabbed me and threw me into a mud puddle while yelling insults. I am a veteran of the United States Navy, a former SEAL, and I served this country for 8 years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I didn't serve so that bullies in costume could terrorize innocent people in my own hometown. I have filed a police report, and I am sharing this because the community needs to know who these men really are. They are not protecting anyone. They are not heroes. They are criminals." She attached screenshots of the CCDF's Facebook page, photos of Morrison and his friends posing with their fake gear, and her own police report number. Then, she hit post. The response was immediate. Within an hour, her post had been shared dozens of times. People began commenting, sharing their own stories of encounters with Morrison and his group. A woman described how they'd followed her teenage daughter, claiming they were ensuring her safety. A man talked about being stopped while jogging and interrogated about why he was in their neighborhood. The stories kept coming, and with each one, Sarah's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about protecting an entire community from men who had convinced themselves that intimidation was the same as service. By midnight, her post had been shared over 500 times. Local news outlets were starting to pay attention. Sarah received messages from reporters asking for interviews. She was just getting started. Morrison and his friends thought they could push people around without consequences. They were about to learn what real accountability looked like. Sarah stayed up late, responding to messages, documenting every story people shared, building her case. Tomorrow, she would take the next step. But tonight, she allowed herself a small smile. The hunters had just become the hunted. Sarah woke up the next morning to find her phone buzzing with notifications. Her post had gone viral overnight, spreading far beyond the local community. It had been shared over 3,000 times, and the comments section had exploded with outrage, support, and more stories about the Colorado Civilian Defense Force. But, more importantly, Morrison and his group had noticed. The CCDF Facebook page had posted a response at 3 in the morning. It was poorly written, full of typos, and dripping with defensive anger, lies, and slander from someone who can't handle real patriots. "We are protecting our community from threats, and if people don't like it, they can leave." This woman was acting suspicious and refused to cooperate with a lawful order. We had every right to defend ourselves. Sarah read it twice, taking notes. They were digging themselves deeper, They didn't even realize it. Claiming she was acting suspicious? She'd been walking into a gas station. Lawful order? They had no authority to give orders to anyone. Defend themselves? She hadn't attacked them. Every word they wrote was more evidence of their delusion and their guilt. She got dressed and made coffee, then sat down at her laptop. Several local news outlets had emailed her overnight, requesting interviews. She chose the most reputable one, a regional news station that had won awards for investigative journalism. The reporter's name was Jennifer Hayes, and her email was professional and respectful. Sarah called the number Jennifer had provided. The reporter answered on the first ring. Ms. Mitchell, thank you so much for reaching out, Jennifer said. Your story has been making waves. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview? Yes, Sarah said. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about me getting revenge. This is about protecting the community from a group of men who are breaking the law and terrorizing people. I want the focus to be on them and their pattern of behavior. Absolutely, Jennifer agreed. We've actually been looking into the CCDF for a few months now after we received complaints, but we didn't have enough to run a story. Your incident, combined with your military background and the response on social media, gives us the angle we need. Can you meet this afternoon? They arranged to meet at a park downtown, away from Sarah's home. She wanted to keep her address private, especially now that Morrison and his friends knew who she was. Before the interview, Sarah spent the morning gathering more evidence. She went back to the gas station and spoke with the clerk who had been working during the incident. He was a young guy, maybe 22, with nervous eyes that kept darting around like he expected trouble. Yeah, I saw what happened, he admitted when Sarah asked. Those guys have been coming around here for weeks, harassing customers. My boss told us not to say anything because he doesn't want trouble. Would you be willing to give a statement to the police? Sarah asked gently. The clerk hesitated. I don't know. Those guys are crazy. What if they come after me? They're bullies, Sarah said. And bullies only have power when people are too afraid to stand up to them. I'm standing up. I hope you will too. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, yeah, someone needs to stop them. Sarah got his name and contact information, then asked if the gas station had security cameras. It did, but the owner would need to be contacted for the footage. Sarah made a note to follow up. She also canvassed the parking lot, looking for any other businesses with cameras that might have caught the incident. She found two, a fast food restaurant and a tire shop. She spoke with both managers, explained the situation, and asked if they'd be willing to review their footage. Both agreed to check. By the time Sarah arrived at the park for her interview, she had witness statements, camera locations, and a growing file of evidence that would be hard for anyone to ignore. Jennifer Hayes was waiting with a camera operator. She was in her 40s, professionally dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. They shook hands, and Jennifer gestured to a bench where they'd conduct the interview. Before we start, Jennifer said, I want you to know we've been doing our homework. We've found at least 15 other incidents involving the CCDF over the past 6 months. Harassment, intimidation, false imprisonment in one case. The local police have been reluctant to act, possibly because one of the CCDF members, Ryan Foster, has a brother who works in the sheriff's department. Sarah's jaw tightened. That explained a lot. So this is bigger than just a few guys playing soldier. Much bigger, Jennifer confirmed. There's a whole network of these militia-type groups across the state. Most are harmless, just people talking tough online. But a few, like the CCDF, have become aggressive. You taking them on is important. Are you ready? Sarah nodded. She'd faced cameras before during military briefings and interviews after particularly notable operations. She knew how to stay calm and deliver her message clearly. The interview lasted 30 minutes. Sarah described the incident in detail, showed the police report on camera, and explained her military background. She talked about what real service meant, about protecting people rather than intimidating them. She was passionate, but controlled, letting the facts speak for themselves. What do you want to see happen? Jennifer asked near the end. I want these men arrested for assault, Sarah said simply. I want their group investigated. And I want the community to know that they have no authority, no training, and no right to terrorize anyone. If you see them, call the police. Don't comply with their fake orders. Don't be afraid of them. They're just ordinary men in costumes, and they need to be treated as the criminals they are. When the interview ended, Jennifer thanked her and promised the story would air that evening on the 6 o'clock news. Sarah went home and waited. She used the time to respond to more messages on social media. Many were supportive, but some were hostile. A few people, presumably friends or supporters of the CCDF, sent her threatening messages. She screenshot every single one and forwarded them to Marcus Chun, who told her to save everything in case things escalated. At 6 o'clock, Sarah turned on the news. The story was the lead segment. Jennifer Hayes appeared on screen, standing in front of Henderson's gas station. A local veteran is speaking out after she says she was assaulted by members of a self-described civilian defense force. Sarah Mitchell, a former Navy SEAL, says she was attacked simply for trying to buy coffee. The segment showed clips from Sarah's interview, interspersed with footage Jennifer's team had gathered of the CCDF in action. They'd found videos of Morrison and his friends stopping people on the street, demanding identification, even entering a public park and declaring it secure. Then came the bombshell. Jennifer had tracked down 3 other victims who agreed to speak on camera. A woman who had been followed to her car. A man who had been shoved when he refused to answer questions. A teenager who had been photographed and his image posted online with claims he was suspicious. Each story built on the last, creating an undeniable pattern of behavior. These weren't isolated incidents. This was organized harassment. The segment ended with Jennifer speaking directly to the camera. We reached out to the Colorado Civilian Defense Force for comment. Derek Morrison, who appears to be the group's leader, declined to appear on camera but sent us a statement claiming they are lawfully protecting the community. However, legal experts we consulted say the group has no authority to stop, detain, or make demands of anyone. Local police say they are now investigating multiple complaints, including the assault on Ms. Mitchell. Sarah's phone exploded with notifications. The news segment was being shared across social media. Local officials were being tagged, asked to respond. The pressure was building. But Sarah knew Morrison wouldn't take this quietly. Men like him, when exposed, either ran away or doubled down. And something told her Morrison was the type to double down. She wasn't wrong. At 8 o'clock that evening, the CCDF posted a video response. It was Morrison, sitting in what looked like a garage, wearing his fake military gear and staring intensely at the camera. This attack on the Colorado Civilian Defense Force is exactly what we've been warning people about, Morrison said. The mainstream media, working with radical elements, is trying to silence patriots who are willing to stand up and protect their communities. This woman, Sarah Mitchell, came at us aggressively. She refused lawful orders. She posed a threat. We did what we had to do to maintain order and security. He continued for several minutes, his rhetoric becoming more extreme. He talked about enemies within, about protecting American values, about how the CCDF would not be intimidated. Sarah watched the entire video, her expression neutral. Morrison was scared. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he kept licking his lips, and how his voice went up slightly when he talked about not being intimidated. He was trying to rally his supporters, but he was also trying to convince himself. The video ended with Morrison making a declaration that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. We will be conducting increased patrols in response to these attacks. The people of this community need to see that we're not backing down. We will be more visible, more active, and more vigilant than ever. Anyone who interferes with our operations will be dealt with according to our protocols. Sarah immediately called Marcus. Did you see Morrison's video? Just finished watching it, Marcus said. The guy's an idiot. He just threatened increased harassment and suggested they'll deal with anyone who interferes. That's going to get someone hurt. I know, Sarah said. What can we do? I'm already making calls. That video is evidence of intent. Combined with everything else, it might be enough to get local law enforcement to actually do something. But, Sarah, you need to be careful. This guy is escalating. He sees you as a direct threat to his little kingdom. Let him come, Sarah said quietly. Don't do that. Don't go into combat mode. This isn't a battlefield. I know, Sarah said, but part of her disagreed. It was a battlefield, just a different kind. Over the next 2 days, things moved quickly. The news story went statewide, then national. Sarah was contacted by larger media outlets, including a cable news network. The story was perfect for the current news cycle. A female Navy SEAL veteran standing up to fake soldiers who were terrorizing a community. Local politicians, who had been silent before, suddenly had opinions. The mayor held a press conference condemning the CCDF. The sheriff announced a full investigation. The state attorney general's office said they were reviewing the matter. But Morrison and his group didn't back down. Instead, they ramped up their activities. They posted daily videos of their patrols. They showed up at public events, standing around in their gear, trying to look intimidating. They were everywhere, and they were making sure people knew it. Sarah received more threats. Her address was posted online by CCDF supporters. Someone threw a rock through her window with a note attached. Back off, or else. She didn't back off. Instead, she documented every threat, every incident, every aggressive action by the CCDF. She was building something bigger now, not just a case against 5 men, but evidence of a broader problem with these militia groups that operated in legal gray areas and terrorized communities. Then, exactly 1 week after the gas station incident, everything came to a head. Morrison made a critical mistake, the kind of mistake Sarah had been waiting for. He posted a video announcing that the CCDF would be conducting a major security operation that weekend at the county fairgrounds, where a children's festival was being held. He said they would be screening all attendees for threats and maintaining a secure perimeter. Sarah read the announcement and knew this was the moment. Morrison was going to create a scene at a family event, and this time, it would be in front of hundreds of people with cameras. This time, there would be no way for anyone to look away. She picked up her phone and started making calls. It was time to finish this. The county fairgrounds were decorated with colorful banners and balloons for the annual children's festival. Families arrived early Saturday morning, kids excited to ride the carousel, play games, and watch the puppet shows. It was supposed to be a day of innocent fun, the kind of community event that made small-town life special. Sarah arrived an hour before the festival officially opened. She wasn't there to enjoy the festivities. She was there to make sure Morrison and his group didn't ruin it for everyone else. She'd spent the previous 3 days preparing. First, she'd contacted the festival organizers and warned them about Morrison's announcement. They were horrified and immediately reached out to local police, demanding protection. The police, finally, feeling the pressure from all the media attention, agreed to have officers present. Next, Sarah had coordinated with Jennifer Hayes and her news crew, who would be covering the festival. But this time, they wouldn't just be reporting. They'd be documenting every interaction, every confrontation, everything Morrison and his friends did would be on camera. Sarah had also reached out to other veterans in the community. Through social media and word of mouth, she'd connected with a group of 15 former military members, men and women who were as disgusted by the CCDF's behavior as she was. They agreed to attend the festival, not to start trouble, but to serve as witnesses and, if necessary, to peacefully intervene if Morrison's group tried to harass families. Finally, and most importantly, Sarah had contacted a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases. His name was Thomas Bradford, and he'd been following her story with interest. He agreed to attend the festival and observe. If Morrison and his friends violated anyone's rights, Thomas would be there to document it and file lawsuits immediately. It was a coordinated operation, and Sarah felt a familiar sense of purpose as she walked through the fairgrounds. This was what she'd been trained for, planning complex operations where every element had to work together perfectly. She spotted the police presence first. For uniformed officers were positioned at different points around the fairgrounds. They looked relaxed but alert. Sarah recognized one of them, Officer Janet Reeves, who had been sympathetic when Sarah followed up on her assault report. Janet gave her a small nod of recognition. The festival organizers, a committee of local volunteers, were setting up booths and checking last-minute details. Sarah approached the committee chair, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen. "Everything ready?" Sarah asked. Margaret looked nervous. "As ready as we can be. I still can't believe this is necessary. This is a children's festival. Who threatens a children's festival? People who care more about power than about community," Sarah said gently. "But don't worry. We're not going to let them ruin this day." Families began arriving as the festival opened at 9. Children ran from booth to booth, their laughter filling the air. It was a beautiful morning, warm with a clear blue sky. Sarah positioned herself near the main entrance, where she could see everyone coming and going. Morrison and his group arrived at 9:30. There were 6 of them this time. The original 5 plus a new recruit, a younger guy who looked barely 20 and scared out of his mind. They were all wearing their surplus military gear, complete with tactical vests and boots. Morrison had even added a beret, which would have been comical if it wasn't so offensive. They marched in formation, trying to look official and intimidating. Several families stopped and stared. Some looked confused. Others looked alarmed. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself directly in their path. Behind her, she could feel the presence of the other veterans who had shown up. They weren't in formation or wearing any gear. They were just regular people, but their bearing and confidence marked them as former military. Morrison saw Sarah, and his jaw tightened. He stopped about 10 feet away from her. "Get out of our way," he said loudly. "We're conducting official security operations." "No, you're not," Sarah said calmly. "You have no authority here. This is a private event on private property, and the organizers have not requested your presence. You need to leave." A crowd was gathering now. Parents were pulling their children closer, watching the confrontation unfold. Jennifer Hayes and her camera crew were filming from a discreet distance. Morrison's face reddened. "We have every right to be here. This is a public event." "Actually," came a new voice, and Thomas Bradford stepped forward. "It's not. This is a private event held on property leased by the festival committee. As their legal representative, I'm informing you that you are trespassing. You need to leave immediately, or the police will escort you out." Morrison looked around and, for the first time, seemed to realize how many people were watching. The 4 police officers had moved closer, their hands resting on their belts. The crowd of families had grown, and several people were recording on their phones. "You can't kick us out," Morrison said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We're protecting these people." "From what?" Sarah asked quietly. She gestured around the fairgrounds. "From families with children? From a puppet show? From a balloon artist? Who exactly is the threat here, Morrison?" One of Morrison's friends, Jake Hendricks, stepped forward. "You think you're so tough because you were in the Navy. You're just a woman trying to act like a man." The veterans behind Sarah stirred, and she held up a hand to keep them calm. She turned her full attention to Hendricks. "I am a veteran of the United States Navy," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I served 8 years, completed SEAL training, and deployed to combat zones where I faced real threats. I know what actual danger looks like, and I know what real courage is. And I can tell you with complete certainty that nothing you're doing here has anything to do with either." She took a step closer to Hendricks. "You want to serve your community? Volunteer at a food bank. Coach a kid's sports team. Help at the senior center. There are 100 ways to make a difference. But this," she gestured at their costumes and gear, "this is just bullying with a flag wrapped around it. And it needs to stop." The crowd erupted in applause. Morrison looked around wildly, realizing he was losing control of the situation. His face twisted with anger and humiliation. "You think you've won?" he shouted at Sarah. "You think you can just destroy what we've built? We're not going anywhere." "Yes, you are," Officer Janet Reeves said, stepping forward. "Gentlemen, you've been asked to leave private property. If you don't do so immediately, you'll be arrested for trespassing." Morrison looked at the 4 police officers, then at the crowd of watching families, then at Sarah. She could see the calculation in his eyes. He wanted to fight, to assert his authority, to prove he was in charge. But he was trapped, and he knew it. "Fine," he spat. "We'll leave. But this isn't over." He turned and started walking toward the exit, his group trailing behind him. They tried to maintain some dignity, walking in formation, but it was clear they were retreating. Several people in the crowd cheered. But Sarah's instincts were screaming at her. Something was wrong. Morrison had given up too easily. Men like him didn't just walk away from public humiliation. She watched as the CCDF group reached the parking lot. They gathered around Morrison's truck, talking in heated, animated voices. Morrison was gesturing wildly, clearly agitated. The others were nodding, pumping each other up. Sarah turned to Officer Reeves. "Something's not right. They're planning something." Janet followed her gaze and frowned. I'll go talk to them. Make sure they actually leave. But before she could move, Morrison suddenly jumped onto the bed of his truck and pulled out what looked like a bullhorn. He raised it to his lips, and his amplified voice boomed across the fairgrounds. People of this community, listen to me. You're being lied to. We are trying to protect you from threats that your government won't acknowledge. That woman, he pointed at Sarah, is part of the problem. She and the liberal media are trying to silence patriots. We will not be silenced. We will not back down. This is our community, and we will defend it. Families were covering their children's ears. Several people looked scared. The police officers were moving quickly toward Morrison, but he wasn't done. If you want real security, real protection, contact the Colorado Civilian Defense Force. Don't trust the corrupt police. Don't trust the lying media. Trust patriots who are willing to stand up and fight. Officer Reeves reached Morrison's truck. Sir, put down the bullhorn and leave immediately, or you will be arrested. Morrison ignored her. This is a message to all enemies of freedom. We are watching. We are ready. We will. He didn't get to finish. Janet reached up, grabbed his ankle, and pulled. Morrison, caught off balance, tumbled off the truck bed. The bullhorn went flying. His friends started to move toward Janet, but the other 3 officers rushed in, hands on their weapons. Nobody move, one of the officers shouted. Hands where we can see them. Suddenly, the situation had gone from a peaceful removal to a potential violent confrontation. Sarah saw Morrison's hand move toward his belt, where he carried what looked like a tactical knife. She moved without thinking, her SEAL training kicking in. She crossed the distance between them in seconds, reached Morrison before he could draw the knife, and locked his arm behind his back in a control hold that was painful but not harmful. Don't, she said quietly in his ear. Don't make this worse than it already is. Morrison struggled for a moment, then went still. The other officers had his friends under control, hands on their backs, being patted down for weapons. You're all under arrest, Janet said, pulling out handcuffs. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. As Morrison was cuffed, he turned his head to look at Sarah. The rage in his eyes was pure and burning. This is your fault, he hissed. All of this. You couldn't just let it go. You had to be a hero. Sarah released him to the police and stepped back. I didn't have to be a hero, she said. I just had to be a good person. You should try it sometime. The 6 members of the CCDF were led to police cars and driven away. The crowd of families erupted in applause again, this time even louder. Children cheered, not really understanding what had happened but picking up on the celebratory mood of their parents. Jennifer Hayes rushed over with her camera crew, looking excited. Sarah, that was incredible. Can we get a statement? But Sarah was watching the police cars drive away, and she felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just sadness. These were men who could have contributed something positive to their community. They could have used their energy and passion for good. Instead, they'd chosen to build their self-worth on making others feel small and afraid. And now they were facing real consequences. Ms. Mitchell, Jennifer pressed gently. Sarah turned to the camera. I hope this sends a message. You can't pretend to be something you're not, and expect no consequences. You can't terrorize people and call it patriotism. Real service means sacrifice. Real courage means standing up for others, not standing over them. And real justice means everyone is held accountable for their actions. She paused, then added, I hope these men learn from this. I hope they find better ways to channel their energy. But if they don't, the law will be waiting for them. The interview ended, and Sarah walked back to the festival grounds. The mood had shifted from tension to celebration. The children's festival continued, louder and more joyful than before. Parents thanked Sarah as she passed, shaking her hand, hugging her, telling her she was a hero. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. As she stood watching a puppet show with a crowd of delighted children, Margaret Chin approached her. Thank you, Margaret said simply. You saved our festival. You saved our community from those men. Sarah shook her head. Your community saved itself. I just gave it a push. She stayed for another hour, making sure everything remained peaceful, then quietly slipped away. As she drove home, she thought about what would come next. Morrison and his friends would face charges. There would be court dates, legal proceedings, probably more media attention. But the immediate threat was over. The CCDF was finished. And maybe, just maybe, other groups like them would think twice before terrorizing their own communities. Sarah pulled into her driveway and sat in her truck for a moment, letting the adrenaline finally drain away. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally. But she was also proud. She'd served her country overseas, fighting enemies in distant lands. Now she'd served her community, standing up to enemies much closer to home. It turned out, the skills she'd learned as a Navy SEAL were useful in more places than she'd ever imagined. 3 months had passed since the incident at the Children's Festival. Sarah sat in the courthouse, waiting for the final verdict in Morrison's trial. The courtroom was packed with people from the community, reporters, and a surprising number of veterans who had shown up to support her. The legal process had been long and complicated. Morrison and his 4 original friends were facing multiple charges: assault, trespassing, disturbing the peace, and impersonating law enforcement. The 6th member, the young recruit, had taken a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Morrison. Sarah had testified 2 weeks earlier. She described the gas station incident in detail, remaining calm and factual despite Morrison's lawyer trying to paint her as aggressive and confrontational. The prosecutor had presented her military record, showing her exemplary service and the respect she'd earned from her fellow SEALs. But the prosecution's case went far beyond just Sarah's assault. They'd found dozens of victims, people who had been harassed, threatened, or intimidated by the CCDF over the past 2 years. Many had been too afraid to come forward before, but Sarah's stand had given them courage. There was the elderly man who had been stopped while walking his dog and interrogated for 20 minutes about where he lived and why he was in their area. The teenage girl who had been followed home from school by CCDF members who claimed they were ensuring her safety. The business owner who had been told he needed to pay the CCDF for security services or face consequences. Each story built a picture of a group that had systematically terrorized a community, hiding behind a thin veneer of patriotism and protection. The trial had revealed other disturbing details. Morrison had been stockpiling weapons in his garage, though all were legally owned. He'd created detailed files on people he deemed threats, including their addresses, daily routines, and family information. His computer contained manifestos about defending America from internal enemies and plans for expanding the CCDF's operation statewide. The young recruit who had taken the plea deal testified that Morrison had become increasingly paranoid and aggressive as the media attention grew. He talked about wanting to make an example of Sarah to show that the CCDF couldn't be intimidated. He'd discussed staging confrontations, creating situations where they could claim self-defense. It painted a picture of a man who had spiraled from a wannabe authority figure into something far more dangerous. Now, the judge was ready to deliver the verdict. Judge Martha Williams was a stern woman in her 60s, known for being fair but firm. She'd presided over the trial with patience, allowing both sides to present their cases fully. "Will the defendants please rise?" Judge Williams said. Morrison and his 4 friends stood. They were no longer wearing their tactical gear. Instead, they wore ill-fitting suits that made them look small and ordinary. Morrison's face was pale, his earlier confidence completely gone. "I've reviewed all the evidence presented in this case," Judge Williams began. "I've heard testimony from dozens of witnesses, and I've considered the arguments from both the prosecution and the defense." She paused, looking directly at Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, you and your associates claimed you were protecting your community. But protection doesn't look like harassment. Service doesn't look like intimidation. Patriotism doesn't give you the right to violate the rights of your fellow citizens." Sarah felt her chest tighten with emotion. This was it. "On the charge of assault against Sarah Mitchell, I find you guilty. On the charges of criminal impersonation, guilty. On charges of harassment, stalking, and intimidation of multiple victims, guilty. On charges of trespassing and disturbing the peace, guilty." One by one, Judge Williams went through each charge for each defendant. The 4 friends received similar verdicts, though their sentences would be lighter since they'd played supporting roles to Morrison's leadership. "Mr. Morrison, You will serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. You are ordered to have no contact with any of your victims, including Ms. Mitchell. You are forbidden from forming or participating in any militia-type organizations. You will complete anger management counseling and community service. Morrison's shoulders slumped. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. The other 4 received sentences ranging from 6 months to 1 year, all with probation and similar restrictions. But Judge Williams wasn't done. She looked out at the courtroom, her expression serious. "I want to address something to this community," she said. "What happened here is not unique. Across this country, there are groups of people who believe they have authority they don't possess. They wrap themselves in flags and claim to be patriots while terrorizing their neighbors." She gestured toward Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell showed us what real courage looks like. She stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent. She used her voice and her skills to protect her community without resorting to violence or breaking the law. That is true service." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Williams didn't stop it, allowing the moment to continue for several seconds before gently tapping her gavel. After the verdict, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, thank her, or just be near her. She handled it with grace, though she felt overwhelmed by the attention. Jennifer Hayes managed to pull her aside for a brief interview. "How do you feel about the verdict?" she asked. Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I feel like justice was served. But, more than that, I hope this sends a message. You don't have to be a veteran or a trained professional to stand up against bullies. You just have to be willing to speak the truth and trust in the system, even when the system seems slow to act." "What's next for you?" Jennifer asked. Sarah smiled. "I've been thinking about that. A lot of people have reached out to me over these past few months. Other veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life. People who want to learn self-defense or situational awareness. Communities that want help dealing with their own militia problems." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "I think I've found my new mission. I'm starting a nonprofit to help train communities in actual security awareness, to help veterans find purpose after service, and to educate people about the difference between real protection and fake authority. I'm calling it Real Service Initiative." Jennifer's eyes lit up. "That's amazing. Can we follow your progress?" "I'd appreciate that," Sarah said. Over the next few months, Sarah threw herself into building the Real Service Initiative. She started by creating free self-defense classes for women in her community, teaching them not just physical techniques, but awareness and confidence. The classes filled up immediately, with waiting lists stretching months long. She partnered with Marcus Chun and other law enforcement professionals to develop training programs for police departments on how to handle militia groups and fake authority figures. Several departments across the state signed up. She worked with veteran organizations to create mentorship programs, pairing newly discharged service members with established veterans who could help them navigate civilian life. The program helped dozens of veterans find purpose and community. She even testified before the state legislature about the need for clearer laws regarding militia groups and impersonation of authority. Several states began drafting legislation based on her recommendations. The work was hard, but it was fulfilling in ways Sarah hadn't expected. Every person she helped, every community that became safer, every veteran who found their path, it all felt like an extension of her service in the military. 6 months after the trial, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. She was working at the small office she'd rented for the Real Service Initiative when the door opened and a young woman walked in. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked. The woman hesitated. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "I am. I'm Rachel Foster. Ryan Foster is my brother." Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. Ryan Foster was one of the CCDF members who had been convicted. He was currently serving his sentence. Rachel rushed to continue. "I'm not here to defend what he did. What my brother and his friends did was wrong. I just wanted you to know that he's been doing some thinking in jail. He asked me to give you this." She held out the folder. Sarah took it cautiously and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Ms. Mitchell," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry for what I did. You were right about everything. We weren't protecting anyone. We were just scared, angry men who wanted to feel important. I thought wearing a uniform and carrying myself like a soldier would make me matter. But All it did was hurt people. The letter went on for several pages. Ryan talked about his childhood, about feeling invisible and worthless. He talked about how Morrison had recruited him by making him feel special, part of something bigger than himself. He talked about how easy it was to believe you were doing good when everyone around you was telling you the same lies. But, most importantly, he talked about how Sarah's actions had forced him to see the truth. How watching her maintain her dignity, speak with facts, and fight within the system had shown him what real strength looked like. "I'm going to be better," the letter concluded. "When I get out, I want to make amends. I want to actually serve my community, not terrorize it. I don't know if you'll ever believe me, but I needed to tell you. Thank you for stopping us before we hurt anyone worse. Thank you for showing me who I could be instead of who I was pretending to be." Sarah looked up at Rachel, who was watching her nervously. "He means it," Rachel said. "I know my brother. He's changed. He really has." Sarah carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the folder. "Thank you for bringing this to me. Tell Ryan that actions matter more than words. If he truly wants to change, there are ways to do that. He can start by volunteering, by helping others, by building up instead of tearing down." Rachel nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'll tell him. Thank you for listening." After Rachel left, Sarah sat alone in her office, thinking about the letter. She'd been so focused on stopping Morrison and his group that she hadn't really considered what might happen to them afterward. Prison was punishment, yes, but it could also be transformation. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come from all of this for everyone involved. That evening, Sarah attended a ceremony at the local VA hall. The community was honoring her with an award for her service and her courage in standing up to the CCDF. She tried to decline, feeling uncomfortable with awards for doing what she felt was simply right, but the organizers insisted. The hall was packed with veterans, community leaders, and families. Sarah stood on a small stage, feeling awkward in a dress she'd borrowed for the occasion. The VA hall president, a Vietnam veteran named Robert Jackson, presented her with a plaque. "Sarah Mitchell represents the best of what it means to serve," he said to the crowd. "She served her country in uniform, and she continues to serve her community every day. She reminds us that courage isn't just about facing enemies on a battlefield. Sometimes it's about standing up in a gas station parking lot. Sometimes it's about protecting children at a festival. Sometimes it's about saying no when everyone else is too afraid to speak." The crowd applauded, and Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. She stepped forward to accept the plaque and address the audience. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite her emotions. "But I need to be clear about something. I'm not a hero. Heroes are people like the men and women in this room who serve their country in wartime. Heroes are the single parents working 2 jobs to support their kids. Heroes are the teachers who show up every day to educate the next generation." She paused, looking out at the faces watching her. "I'm just someone who refused to accept that bullies should win. I'm just someone who remembered that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. And I'm just someone who believes that every single person in this room, in this community, has the power to stand up for what's right." She held up the plaque. "So this isn't my award. This is our award. This belongs to everyone who spoke up, who shared their stories, who supported each other. This belongs to the community that decided enough was enough." The applause was deafening. People stood, clapping and cheering. Sarah saw veterans with tears in their eyes, families holding their children, and faces filled with pride and hope. As the ceremony ended and people began to mingle, Sarah was approached by a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with bright eyes and a nervous smile. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to tell you something," the young woman said. "You're not bothering me," Sarah replied warmly. "I'm joining the Navy," the young woman said, her voice filled with determination. "I'm going to try out for the SEALs. Because of you. Because you showed me that women can do anything if we're brave enough to try." Sarah felt her eyes water. This was why she'd stood up. This was why it all mattered. Not for awards or recognition, but for moments like this. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Emily. Emily Rodriguez." "Emily, the path you're choosing is hard. Harder than almost anything you can imagine. You'll want to quit 100 times. People will tell you that you can't do it. You'll doubt yourself." Emily nodded, listening intently. "But If you want it badly enough, if you're willing to give everything you have, you can make it. And when you do, you'll join a brotherhood and sisterhood of warriors who will have your back for the rest of your life. Sarah held out her hand. Good luck, Emily. Make us proud. They shook hands, and Emily walked away with a glow of determination on her face. Sarah watched her go, thinking about her own journey, about how one choice to stand up had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. Morrison was in jail. His group was disbanded. Ryan Foster was seeking redemption. A young woman was pursuing her dreams. A community had learned that standing together was stronger than being silent alone. And Sarah had found her purpose again. As she drove home that night, Sarah thought about the moment in the mud at the gas station. Morrison and his friends had thought they were putting her in her place, humiliating her, showing her that she was powerless. Instead, they'd awakened something in her. They'd reminded her that service wasn't about glory or recognition. It was about seeing something wrong and having the courage to make it right. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, looking at her house, her quiet street, her ordinary life. It wasn't Afghanistan. It wasn't a combat zone. But it was home, and it was worth protecting. Sarah got out of her truck, locked it, and walked to her front door. Tomorrow, she'd be back at the Real Service Initiative, helping more people, building more programs, making more difference. Tonight, she was just Sarah Mitchell, former Navy SEAL, current community member, always a warrior in whatever form that took. And that was enough.